Morning, everybody. I was very timely listening to Dan because I think what he was talking about is a nice kind of segue into some of the things I'll be talking about this morning, and what some of this might look like on the ground in the province, or at least what the ministry is doing to generate some of the data that will feed into AAFC's calculations on greenhouse inventories and emissions reductions. I'm going to be sharing with you guys some of the initiatives that the Ministry of Agriculture is doing, some of our priorities as they're dictated, by our funding sources and the needs that we've identified as the sector. Those we work with many of you here, and so I thought by kind of sharing what's going on with us will help you guys understand maybe why we're pushing in certain directions or asking for the things that we do. I'll talk about, some of the initiatives that we're doing around soil science. And of course, this is a data workshop, so I'm kind of trying to keep everything somewhat focused on data needs and, and identifying where, using you guys to help us identify where we fit as a ministry and supporting some of the work that you're doing to help us also achieve some of our own priorities. So first this morning, I'm just going to jump in and talk about what some of our priorities are, some of the programs we have going on, and what some of our reporting requirements are going to be. So I think everybody here knows that we're coming into our next 5-year funding cycle. Probably everybody knows that the marketing gurus just threw an S in front of CAP, so it's now the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. And within that, there's a few focus areas, and what I'll mostly be talking about here is the climate change and environment. It's probably the most relevant for the group in this room. And so the priorities are tackling climate change and environmental protection to support greenhouse gas emission reductions and long-term vitality in the sector, and positioning producers and processors to seize on the economic opportunities from evolving consumer demands. So things that we're really looking to drive here are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, helping the agricultural sector adapt to a changing climate, and improving environmental sustainability. So as part of SCAP and these federal, provincial, territorial negotiations, there's a group of 140 BMPs have been developed. And, that's through these national consultations. And then each of those BMPs is associated with one of the environmental benefits identified in the Guelph statement. Within that 140 BMP sort of master national list, there's a couple sub-lists. One is a priority set of BMPs. And those are, I'll get into that in a second. And the other is some environmental, like ones with ecological goods and services. And those are called, and that's part of a program called the Resilient Agricultural Landscapes Program. Okay. Hopefully the little diagram there helps us understand how all of these fit together and what they mean. But I wanted to identify that within that national list, there's 35 soil health related BMPs, and 9 of those are common between that priority list and the RALP list. And again, RALP is the Resilient Agricultural Landscapes Program. And then there's 2 that are just either in the priority list or the RALP list. And hopefully this will get a little clearer as I go on. Okay, so that national list, it's that master list of all of the beneficial management practices that we might want to be focusing our resources on and helping the sector to adopt. They're broadly worded such that, they can be applied across different contexts, or different realities that each of the provinces has, and the differences in what the agricultural production systems are. Now, and so they're kind of this broad category, like say cover cropping. So the way that we might apply that is we might actually develop a range of BMPs all related to cover cropping, but are specific to specific production conditions, right? So maybe they're relay crops, maybe they're overwintering ones, but use the cover cropping example. So you can see how we could have multiple things under that one national BMP. right? Again, they're aligned with the environmental benefits as stated as in the Gulf statement. And we have on most of those in the national list, it's very basic reporting requirements that we just kind of on activity, things that we're doing. It's not too onerous. Where I see some research opportunities that might be of interest to this group is identifying and developing new BMPs for inclusion on the list. So there's going to be opportunities throughout the 5-year SCAP funding program, where if we see like some good opportunities in BC for a new BMP, and we could see like it's going to be a benefit to farmers and have some mitigation outcomes, we can do some research work to kind of develop that and then pitch to have it added to the list. Okay. So this national list, it's not something that's just is set in stone for the next 5 years, right? We can add things to it. Now, the subset of priority BMPs, these are the ones with the best emission factors associated with them. So the ones that we're going to be most sure that we're going to have some mitigation outcomes. And those are the ones that, you know, as Dan was saying, we will be feeding in some additional reporting to them, and AAFC will use that data to help calculate emission reductions. So, and this is one of the big differences with SCAP is instead of just reporting that we, you know, developed some fact sheets and did some field days, on these BMPs, we actually have to report on adoption rates, right? We want to know, you know, how many acres have adopted that BMP, for example. Okay. So the best program that the Ministry of Agriculture currently has or the best mechanism for collecting that data is through our cost share BMP program, right? Because farmers will apply for funding and we can collect some data from that, exactly how many acres are they applying that BMP to. Okay. So again, where we see some research opportunities, I see it in terms of like, so as Dan was just saying, you know, we've got, I think for a lot of these, the emission factors are probably developed for the prairie production systems. And we maybe don't have some specific emission factors for BC. So we could be doing some further research on these to develop, you know, and geez, in BC, we've got such a, you know, diversity across the province. Maybe we eventually get to the point where we're developing regional emission factors for specific practices. And then that can be fed back in to improve the calculations that AAFC is doing. Now, I think we could also, if we see some BMPs on that larger national list, but they aren't on this priority list, and we think they have some really good potential, again, we could be doing some additional work. If we establish those emission factors to get those really dialed in, we could probably get some new BMPs added to that priority list. This is a bit of a focus for the ministry because a percentage of our SCAP funding has to be allocated to having this priority set adopted. Now, like I said, I think there's 41 BMPs on this list. We have limited resources. So I'm thinking we're not going to be trying to push every single one of these BMPs, right? Some of them, again, this list was developed with all of the provinces. So some of those BMPs may not be as relevant for the production conditions in BC. So, you know, we would maybe like the help of people in this room to help to focus on which BMPs, you know, have the best potential for adoption, you know, that are interested, farmers are interested in and are relevant and will have the greatest mitigation outcomes. And then we can kind of focus our energies there. Okay, that other sub-list that I mentioned is on the Resilient Agricultural Landscapes Program. So it's a $250 million nationally, federal, provincial, territorial cost share program as part of SCAP. Right, this program supports carbon sequestration, adaptation, and addresses other environmental co-benefits. So the way I look at the route BMPs is, you know, they provide some ecological goods and services, they'll have some mitigation outcomes, but the farmers may not see direct benefit from these, right? Like they're not going to see improvements in production necessarily or reduced costs. So this program focuses on some cost share funding to encourage to incentivize producers to adopt these BMPs. You know, and it could be things around restoring grasslands, enhancing riparian areas. The expected outcomes from this program is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2.7 megatons per year, seeing improved soil health, increasing conservation and restoration of wildlife habitat, and strengthening the resilience of agricultural lands and improved water quality. One thing I didn't mention, I think that through the RELP program, it's going to be a cost share. We're not exactly sure how we're delivering that yet, but some programs that might be suitable for funneling those RELP funds through is like our Farmland Advantage or some of the work that we do with the Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust, like the grassland set-asides. You've probably heard a lot of the ministry on regenerative agriculture. Our former minister, and it's carried through with our new minister, is that regenerative agriculture is still a priority for us. And it has many linkages to our climate change and environment programming and services. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later this morning. But continue to kind of hear it. It's, yeah, and I think it fits in really nicely with what everybody is doing here. Okay. So we currently deliver and support a wide range of programs that promote the development of tools and knowledge. We provide extension and knowledge transfer services and those on-farm adoption supports. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our research and data needs for our on-farm adoption support. So these are programs like our Environmental Farm Plan program, Farmland Advantage, our new extreme weather preparedness and beneficial management practices. So I was talking about the BMPs. You know, we can do some work to further refine those BMPs. And one of the ways that we encourage or incentivize producers is through programs like Environmental Farm Plan, Farmland Advantage, and the Beneficial Management Practices program. They can kind of push for the adoption of BMPs that will have mitigation outcomes or help farmers adapt to a changing climate. Our extreme weather preparedness program is relatively new. It was piloted last year, and that helps producers adapt to extreme weather events like drought, floods, and forest fires. Right, but we have a need to maybe continually to refine the types of things that we're promoting. We've talked about, are some of these BMPs really as beneficial as we think that they are? And so I think continued research on these things will help drive how we deliver these programs, the types of things that we're incentivizing and how we incentivize them. Under research and tool development, which is more of the work that my team does, including Josh, our nutrient management specialist. And this is kind of developing decision aid tools or developing knowledge. So a good example, and I was glad to see Drew Yates yesterday give a plug for our nutrient management calculator. And so nutrient management is a big priority for my team. And we're always looking to improve kind of our knowledge around nutrient management. We have such a diversity of crops, and understanding optimal nitrogen rates for the different crops in the different regions of the province is something that we can continue to work on. We are, we're trying to support producers with complying with the Agricultural and Environment Code of Practice. So I said that wrong. Agricultural and Environmental Management Code of Practice. As you're probably all aware, a lot of producers are having to have nutrient management plans. So having good recommendations on what are appropriate nitrogen rates for the different commodities that are produced in the province is something that we're continuing to look to develop. So we'll have some research needs there, and that will continue to feed into some of our tools like the nutrient management calculator or the development of fact sheets. Now, some of our program delivery is we're getting more into the extension space. And we're rolling out a sort of a regional extension model, or expanding how we deliver that. And it's kind of kicking off this year. It's including a focus on mitigation. So I think in the past, maybe we pushed a little more on adaptation. Mitigation is really a big priority for us now. We're looking to increase producer participation in this. So engaging more. We've broken the province down. I think we've settled on about 7 regions, plus an aquaculture one that's kind of, so because that kind of aquaculture spans the coast and includes maybe some land-based aquaculture production, we've decided to have an aquaculture region. And so with these different regions, we're going to be doing more stakeholder consultation. So that's, engaging with the different producer and industry groups and farmers in a region to help better understand the challenges that they're facing in their region and how we can help to address those challenges. And then we're shifting more towards producer-centric applied research and extension services. So, we're looking to do a lot of on-farm research and demonstration type projects. I know Conley here, our regional agrologist, has some work going on already moving forward, right? And we're looking to improve our external communication on climate change and environmental opportunities. Now, there's 2 points in the last slide I kind of want to focus on a little more, hopefully identify the relevance of this group. So I mentioned we're going to be doing these regional stakeholder engagements and understanding their priorities. I see that we're going to have to find a way to balance, maybe balance isn't the right term, but find synergies between what we're hearing from the different regions and what their needs and interests are with some of our national, like our priorities under SCAP or nutrient management, water conservation, and see if we can find some alignments where we can then develop programs that meet all of those goals. Right now, we look at our, I mentioned us doing more on-farm research and demonstration, and we're kind of, largely viewing these as extension activities, but I don't see them as solely extension. I also see them as research opportunities. And I see them, they can kind of be similar to the work that's being done through Living Labs, right? But perhaps we'll be a little bit more expansive, and provincial focus and cross-commodity focused in what we do. And really kind of addressing some of those local needs, which I think Living Labs does as well. But I see there could be an opportunity that we could tie in and support or build out some of what's happening with Living Labs there. It offers from a research point of view. I think about Sean, you do, some of your research is that mother site with daughter sites. And I could kind of see how some of our on-farm research and demonstration could be some of that validation, that ground truthing, that evaluating practices within a production setting. Right. So one of the things that we've been working on is a cover cropping decision aid tool. Maybe it's an app that helps a producer identify the best cover crops for their farm. And I know Medi is also at AFC is also working on something like that. So we've kind of gathered a lot of information to have a database of the different attributes of the cover crops. But what we're lacking is some of that regional applicability. And so if we identify through our regional engagements that everybody's, different regions are interested in cover cropping, we can have some demonstration plots up there, have some field days. It's a good extension activity to come out and kick the dirt. But we could also be taking some measurements off of those plots, right? What's the biomass production? How well did each of those species or mixes of species perform in that area? And then we could be feeding that data back into some of our tool development, and it could make that app more relevant. So on our kind of data collection and reporting, we've been talking, nothing is set in stone yet. So it's just kind of discussions that we're having in terms of like, how do we develop, like, get a better understanding of what's going on, what's relevant for people, how are these BMPs performing under the different conditions that they're being, tested under. So we're thinking about any project, any of these research and demonstration projects that we're doing ourselves, or maybe some projects that we might be funding through other researchers, that we could request a standard set of, soil indicators to be measured, right? Kind of a before and after type thing. And that can help to build out, it could be a component of building out baseline soil health or soil carbon levels and evaluating some changes due to those management practices. So really we could be looking at that BMP by region, by production system interactions. That can also help to feed into refining emission factors and abatement costs, and also help us to identify where to prioritize our resources, which regions and which BMPs to be pushing the hardest on. And, one idea that we have that I just want to throw out there, and I feel a bit bad because there's so many people have great ideas and I get to stand up here and plug my own ideas. And I don't mean to discredit anybody else's fantastic ideas. But we've talked about the idea of maybe having a soil health roadshow, where we can tour the province and show up at a field day near you, and we could have our little tent there and do some demonstrations and kind of really help to spread the gospel on soils a little bit. But it's an opportunity to kind of spread the word on soils and increase knowledge. But I also see it as a way that maybe we could start building relationships with producers, helping to overcome some of that distrust that they have with government. But if we could get out there and maybe we go to some of these farms, the farmers who have come to these events, and we can do some soil measurements there, kind of collect some of their baseline data. And if we continued this program over several years and showed up, we could then do some follow-up and do some monitoring testing. And then through that, we're starting to fill in some of the gaps in the baseline, and again, have a bit more of a longer term view on how some of those management practices are affecting things. Ideally, if we could do this at least 5 years, maybe we could monitor some changes in carbon. Don't know if that's long enough. Okay, more white space. That was it. Guess I took out the wrong one. So I had some questions. I guess that was my presentation on some of the things that we're doing as a ministry. Good timing. Okay. Is there any questions, comments on what we're doing?
Yeah, here, let me help you. He's a bit have to do a solo show for the morning, so I'm just gonna be here as a support. So we can start with Q&A, and then the fun was to have a plenary discussion on a couple of key questions. So we have a first question for you right here.
Thanks for your presentation. And I'm so happy to see that the Ministry of Agriculture is starting to get back in extension.
Yeah, maybe. Lots, right?
Very opposite. In the old days, we used to have a district ag would come out and we talked about issues and trying to work across. So I'm really glad it's turning that way. Now, a specific question. On the new BMP list, is it out? Is it public now, or when will it be coming out?
I don't think it's public yet. We still haven't signed the multilateral agreements yet. So I've been meaning to ask and just clarify, because there's some people I want to share that list with, so we can maybe start brainstorming some ideas. But I think we might need to hold back until the agreement is signed.
And that will be by April 1st.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, because of the new funding cycle starts April 1st. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to say your name?
Josephine from BC.
Perfect.
So I have a question on the impact. So there's a lot of emphasis on the emission factors, in particular for prioritization within the BMPs. There are a lot of different types of impacts.
Mm-hmm.
How much is that going to play out? How much is the emphasis going to be on ultimately for every BMP, the emissions impacts versus looking at what's their own contributions in other dimensions?
Yeah, maybe I glazed over that part is on the co-benefits part of it. So yeah, mitigation, greenhouse gas emission reductions, carbon sequestration is a huge priority. It's not all we want to focus on, because I think if that's all we do and forget everything else, we're going to end up in a different pickle. So like I mentioned, all of those BMPs are associated with different environmental benefits from the GWEL statement. And so it is like mitigation is one of them, adaptation, soil health, water quality, and environmental benefits, I believe are the 5 of them. So each of those BMPs is associated, may have other outcomes associated with it. We do want to be identifying the co-benefits. I don't think we're going to be very successful encouraging producers to adopt these BMPs if all we're telling them is on the greenhouse gas reduction potential, right? If we're able to identify how that BMP helps them adapt to a changing climate and have a more resilient production system, what is identifying the return on that investment? How does it improve their production or the consistency of production? So we do need to be focusing on all of those other co-benefits as well.